The desert heat was unbearable that August morning in Afghanistan. Dr. Sarah Chen wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished treating another wounded soldier at the forward operating base. As a trauma surgeon with Doctors Without Borders, she had volunteered for this dangerous assignment to help save lives in one of the world's most dangerous places. The sound of helicopters approaching made everyone look up. Sarah watched as 2 Black Hawks landed, kicking up clouds of dust. She could see wounded soldiers being carried out, and her heart raced. This looked serious. "Doc, we need you now," shouted Sergeant Rodriguez as he ran toward her tent. "We've got a SEAL team that was ambushed, multiple casualties, and their commander is in bad shape." Sarah grabbed her medical bag and rushed to the landing zone. The scene was chaos. Soldiers were shouting orders, medics were running everywhere, and the wounded were being carried on stretchers. But her eyes immediately found him. Commander Jake Mitchell lay on a stretcher, his tactical gear torn and bloody. A piece of shrapnel had torn through his shoulder, and he was losing blood fast. But what struck Sarah most was his eyes. Even in pain, they were alert and focused, constantly checking on his men. "Take care of my guys first," he said through gritted teeth when Sarah approached him. His voice was strong despite his injuries. "You're bleeding heavily, Commander. You need immediate attention," Sarah replied, already examining his wounds. "My men come first." "That's an order," he said, trying to sit up. Sarah looked into his eyes and saw something that made her heart skip. Here was a man who would put everyone else before himself, even when facing death. She had treated many soldiers, but none had affected her like this. "I'll treat you all, but you need surgery now or you won't be around to take care of anyone," she said firmly. For the first time, Jake smiled. "You're pretty tough for a doctor." "You haven't seen anything yet," Sarah replied, starting an IV line. As she worked to stop his bleeding, explosions suddenly erupted around the base. The Taliban had followed the helicopters and was now attacking the camp. Bullets whistled overhead as Sarah continued working on Jake's wounds. "Get to cover," Jake shouted, trying to push her away. "Not until I stop this bleeding," Sarah said, staying focused on her work even as chaos erupted around them. A rocket-propelled grenade exploded near their position, throwing dirt and debris everywhere. Sarah covered Jake with her own body, protecting him from the flying metal and rocks. "You're crazy," Jake said, looking up at her with amazement. "Maybe, but you're not dying on my watch," Sarah replied, continuing to work on his wounds. The firefight continued for what felt like hours. Sarah never left Jake's side, even when enemy fire came dangerously close. She worked under impossible conditions, using her body to shield him while treating his injuries. When Jake's blood pressure started dropping, Sarah knew she had to act fast. Without proper equipment or a sterile environment, she performed emergency surgery right there in the dirt, with bullets flying overhead. "Talk to me, Commander." "Tell me about your family," Sarah said, trying to keep him conscious. "My mom, she lives in Texas, makes the best apple pie," Jake said weakly. "Always worried about me joining the military." "What else?" Sarah asked, carefully removing shrapnel from his shoulder. "I have a little sister, Emma. She's studying to be a teacher. Always said I was too stubborn for my own good." Jake smiled, despite the pain. "She sounds smart," Sarah said, continuing her work. As she worked, Jake watched her face. Even covered in dirt and sweat, with explosions happening around them, she was beautiful. But more than that, she was brave, in a way he had never seen. She could have run to safety, but she stayed with him. "Why are you doing this?" Jake asked. "You could get killed staying here." Sarah paused for a moment and looked into his eyes. "Because saving lives is what I do. And because something tells me the world needs people like you in it." The saving lives. The battle finally ended when reinforcements arrived. Sarah had successfully stabilized Jake and 3 of his team members. As they prepared to evacuate him to a larger medical facility in Germany, Jake grabbed her hand. "I don't even know your full name," he said. "Dr. Sarah Chen," she replied, squeezing his hand gently. "Sarah," he repeated, as if memorizing it. "I owe you my life." "You don't owe me anything. Just get better and go home to your family," Sarah said. "Will I see you again?" Jake asked as they loaded him onto the helicopter. Sarah smiled sadly. "I hope so," but we live in different worlds. As the helicopter lifted off, Jake watched Sarah get smaller and smaller until she disappeared. He had never felt anything like this before. In all his years as a SEAL, through all the dangerous missions, he had never met anyone like her. Sarah stood watching the helicopter until it was just a dot in the sky. She touched her chest, where she could still feel the rapid beating of her heart. Something had changed in those few hours under fire. She had saved many lives, but somehow, Jake Mitchell had saved something in her too. Neither of them knew that this was just the beginning of their story. The war would end. They would return to their separate lives. But the connection forged under fire would never be forgotten. 3 years had passed since that fateful day in Afghanistan. Jake Mitchell stood in his apartment in Virginia Beach, looking at a newspaper clipping he had kept all this time. It was a small article about Doctors Without Borders and their work in war zones. He had searched for any mention of Dr. Sarah Chen, but had never found anything. Jake had healed completely from his physical wounds, but something inside him had never been the same. He had tried dating other women, but none of them compared to the brave doctor who had saved his life under fire. His friends thought he was crazy, still thinking about a woman he had met for only a few hours. "You need to move on, brother," his best friend and fellow SEAL, Marcus, had told him many times. She was just doing her job, but Jake knew it was more than that. The way Sarah had looked at him, the way she had risked her own life to save his, the connection he had felt, it was real. He had never experienced anything like it before or since. Meanwhile, across the country in Seattle, Sarah was finishing her shift at Seattle General Hospital. She had returned from Afghanistan 2 years ago and had thrown herself into her work, trying to forget the memories that haunted her dreams. But she couldn't forget Jake Mitchell. She still remembered the way he had tried to put his men before himself, even when he was badly injured. She remembered his smile when she had challenged him, and the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. Sarah had tried to find him through military channels, but had been told that information about special operations personnel was classified. She had even considered hiring a private investigator, but had decided against it. If they were meant to find each other again, it would happen naturally. Her friend and fellow doctor, Lisa, often teased her about her non-existent dating life. "You need to get back out there, Sarah. You can't keep comparing every man to some soldier you met in a war zone," Lisa would say. But Sarah knew that what she had felt with Jake wasn't something she could find with just anyone. She had dated a few men since returning, but none of them made her feel the way Jake had in those few hours under fire. Both Jake and Sarah threw themselves into their work, trying to fill the emptiness they felt. Jake took on the most dangerous missions, earning a reputation as one of the best SEAL commanders in the Navy. Sarah worked extra shifts, volunteering for the most difficult cases, saving lives whenever she could. One evening, Jake was having dinner with his sister Emma, who was now a teacher in Texas, just as she had planned. "You look tired, Jake," Emma said, studying her brother's face. "When was the last time you took a vacation?" "I don't need a vacation. I'm fine," Jake replied, but Emma could see through his act. "Is this about that doctor you met in Afghanistan? The one you never stopped thinking about?" Emma asked gently. Jake was quiet for a long moment. He had told Emma about Sarah, but he had never admitted how much she still affected him. "Maybe," he said finally. "I know it sounds crazy. I only knew her for a few hours." "It doesn't sound crazy at all," Emma said. "Sometimes you just know when you meet the right person. Mom always said she knew Dad was the one the moment she met him. But how do I find her?" "I don't even know where she is," Jake said. "Have you tried looking her up online? Social media? Professional directories?" Emma suggested. Jake shook his head. He had thought about it many times, but something had always stopped him. What if she didn't remember him the way he remembered her? What if she had moved on with her life? That same week, Sarah was attending a medical conference in Washington, D.C. She was presenting her research on trauma surgery in combat zones, sharing the techniques she had learned in Afghanistan. After her presentation, a young medical student approached her. "Dr. Chen, your work is amazing. I'm actually writing my thesis on emergency medicine in war zones. Would it be possible to interview you about your experiences?" the student asked. "Of course," Sarah replied. What specifically are you interested in? Well, I read about a case where you performed emergency surgery during an enemy attack. You saved a Navy SEAL commander under fire. That must have been incredibly difficult, the student said. Sarah's heart stopped. Someone had written about that day. Where did you read about this? She asked. It was in a military medical journal. The case was studied because of the innovative techniques you used in such extreme conditions. The patient made a full recovery and returned to active duty, the student explained. That night, Sarah sat in her hotel room, staring at the medical journal article on her laptop. There it was, a detailed account of the surgery she had performed on Jake, written by the doctors who had treated him in Germany. The article didn't mention Jake by name, but it described his injuries and recovery in detail. At the bottom of the article, there was a note. The patient expressed his gratitude for Dr. Chen's life-saving work and wished to make contact to properly thank her. Sarah's hands were shaking as she read those words. Jake had tried to find her too. The next morning, Sarah called the journal that had published the article. After explaining who she was, they gave her the contact information for the military medical facility that had submitted the case study. Meanwhile, Jake was returning from a training mission when his commanding officer called him into his office. "Mitchell, I have something that might interest you," Colonel Harrison said, handing him a letter. This came through official channels. "A doctor is trying to locate you regarding a medical case from Afghanistan." Jake's heart started racing as he read the letter. It was from Dr. Sarah Chen, requesting contact information so she could follow up on his recovery. She had included her phone number and email address. That evening, Jake sat in his apartment, staring at Sarah's letter. His phone was in his hand, but he couldn't bring himself to dial her number. What would he say? How do you call someone after 3 years and tell them you haven't been able to stop thinking about them? Finally, he took a deep breath and dialed. The phone rang twice before Sarah answered. "Hello? Is this Dr. Sarah Chen?" Jake asked, his voice nervous. There was a pause on the other end. "Yes, this is Sarah. May I ask who's calling?" "This is Jake Mitchell, Commander Jake Mitchell. You saved my life in Afghanistan 3 years ago." Sarah dropped the phone. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might explode. She picked up the phone with trembling hands. "Jake?" she whispered. "Hi, Sarah," he said softly. "I got your message. I've been wanting to call you for 3 years." They talked for 3 hours that night, as if no time had passed at all. They shared what had happened in their lives, their careers, their families. But most importantly, they both admitted that they had never forgotten each other. "I have to ask you something," Jake said near the end of their conversation. "Are you seeing anyone?" "No," Sarah replied honestly. "Are you?" "No. I haven't been able to date anyone seriously since Afghanistan." "No one compared to you." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "I felt the same way. Would you like to meet? I know you're in Seattle, and I'm in Virginia, but maybe we could meet somewhere in between," Jake suggested. "I would love that," Sarah said. 2 weeks later, they met at a coffee shop in Chicago. When Sarah walked through the door, Jake stood up. And for a moment, they just stared at each other. He looked different in civilian clothes, but his eyes were the same. Kind, strong, and focused. Sarah looked even more beautiful than he remembered. Her hair was longer now, and she was wearing a simple blue dress that made her eyes shine. "Hi," she said shyly. "Hi," he replied, smiling the same smile she remembered from Afghanistan. They spent the entire weekend together, walking through the city, talking, laughing, and getting to know each other properly. It was as if they had known each other their entire lives. On Sunday night, as they prepared to return to their separate cities, Jake took Sarah's hands in his. "I don't want this to end," he said. "Neither do I," Sarah replied. "I know this is crazy, but I think I've been in love with you since the day you saved my life," Jake said. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "That's not crazy at all. I felt the same way." They knew that making a long-distance relationship work would be difficult, but they also knew that what they had was special. They had found each other again, after 3 years, and they weren't going to let each other go again. For the next year and a half, Jake and Sarah built their relationship through video calls, text messages, and weekend visits. Every other week, one of them would fly to see the other. It wasn't easy, but their love grew stronger with each passing day. Jake's SEAL Team brothers were amazed at the change in him. He was happier, more relaxed, and talked about Sarah constantly. Marcus, his best friend, finally met Sarah when she came to visit Virginia Beach. "I get it now," Marcus told Jake after meeting her. "She's special. Don't let her go." Sarah's friends in Seattle were equally impressed when Jake came to visit. He was nothing like the typical military stereotype they had imagined. He was thoughtful, funny, and clearly devoted to Sarah. "He looks at you like you hung the moon," Lisa told Sarah after meeting Jake for the first time. The challenges of a long-distance relationship tested them, but it also made them appreciate their time together even more. They learned to communicate deeply, sharing their fears, dreams, and hopes for the future. During one of Sarah's visits to Virginia Beach, Jake took her to his favorite spot on the beach. They walked along the shore as the sun was setting, talking about their future. "I've been thinking about getting out of the Navy," Jake said suddenly. Sarah stopped walking and looked at him in surprise. "What? Why? I thought you loved being a SEAL." "I do, but I love you more," Jake said, taking her hands. "I want to build a life with you, Sarah. I want to wake up next to you every morning. Not just on weekends." "Jake, I would never ask you to give up your career for me," Sarah said. "You're not asking. I'm choosing," Jake replied. "I've served my country for 12 years. I'm ready for the next chapter of my life. And I want that chapter to be with you." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. She knew how much his military career meant to him, but she also knew that he was serious about their future. "What would you do?" she asked. "I've been offered a position training new SEAL recruits here in Virginia Beach. It would mean no more deployments, no more dangerous missions, just a regular schedule and the chance to build a normal life with you," Jake explained. "And you want me to move to Virginia?" Sarah asked. "Only if you want to. I know you have a great job in Seattle, but there are excellent hospitals here too. We could build a life together," Jake said. That night, Sarah called her parents in California to talk about Jake's proposal. Her parents had been worried about her relationship with a military man. But when they met Jake, they immediately approved. "He's a good man, Sarah," her mother said, "and he clearly adores you. But what if I move to Virginia and we don't work out? What if I'm giving up too much?" Sarah asked. "Sweetheart, you've been happier in the past year than I've seen you in your entire life," her father said. "Sometimes you have to take a leap of faith for love." 3 months later, Sarah moved to Virginia Beach. She found a position at the Norfolk Naval Medical Center, where she could continue her trauma surgery work with military patients. It felt like the perfect combination of her skills and her new life with Jake. Jake transitioned to his new role training SEAL recruits, and they settled into a wonderful routine together. They bought a small house near the beach, adopted a dog named Charlie, and began building the life they had dreamed about during their long-distance relationship. One evening, exactly 2 years after they had reunited in Chicago, Jake planned a special surprise for Sarah. He told her they were going to dinner at their favorite restaurant, but instead, he drove to the beach where they had first talked about their future together. As they walked along the shore, Sarah noticed something strange in the sand ahead of them. There were candles forming a heart shape, and rose petals scattered everywhere. "Jake, what is this?" Sarah asked, confused. Jake stopped walking and turned to face her. His heart was beating so fast he could barely speak. He had planned this moment for months, but now that it was here, he was nervous. "Sarah, 3 years ago, you saved my life in Afghanistan," Jake began. "But you did more than that. You showed me what real courage looks like. You risked everything to save a stranger. And in doing so, you saved my heart too." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she realized what was happening. "I have loved you since the moment you refused to leave my side under fire. I loved you during the 3 years we were apart, and I love you more every day we're together," Jake continued. He got down on one knee and pulled out a ring box. Dr. Sarah Chen. Will you marry me? Sarah was crying so hard she could barely speak. Yes. Of course, yes. Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed as the waves crashed nearby, and the candles flickered in the ocean breeze. 6 months later, on a beautiful Saturday in May, Jake stood at the altar of a small church in Virginia Beach. He was wearing his navy dress uniform, his medals gleaming in the sunlight that streamed through the stained glass windows. His hands were shaking as he waited. Marcus stood beside him as his best man, along with 2 other SEAL brothers. In the front row, his mother and sister Emma were crying happy tears. The church was filled with friends and family from both sides. Sarah's parents had flown in from California, along with her brother and his family. Many of Jake's military friends were there, as well as Sarah's colleagues from the hospital. The music began, and Jake's heart started racing. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle first. Lisa, Emma, and 2 of Sarah's medical school friends. They looked beautiful in their soft blue dresses. Then the music changed to the wedding march, and everyone stood. Jake's breath caught in his throat as the doors at the back of the church opened. Sarah appeared in a simple but elegant white dress, her father at her side. She was carrying a bouquet of white roses and baby's breath. But Jake only saw her face, radiant with joy and love. As she walked down the aisle toward him, Jake thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a battlefield in Afghanistan to a church in Virginia Beach, their love had survived distance, time, and uncertainty. When Sarah reached the altar, her father kissed her cheek and placed her hand in Jake's. Jake looked into her eyes and saw everything he had ever wanted in life. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "You're not bad yourself," Sarah whispered back, making him smile. The ceremony was perfect. They had written their own vows, promising to love, support, and challenge each other for the rest of their lives. When they exchanged rings, Sarah remembered the day she had first seen Jake injured and bleeding, never imagining that one day she would be marrying him. "You may kiss the bride," the pastor announced. Jake cupped Sarah's face in his hands and kissed her softly. The church erupted in cheers and applause. At the reception, Jake gave a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes. 3 years ago, Sarah saved my life under enemy fire," he said, looking at his new wife. "But she did more than that. She taught me what real love looks like. Love that doesn't count the cost. Love that stands strong in the face of danger. Love that waits patiently and never gives up hope." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as Jake continued. "Today, I get to call her my wife, and I promise to love her with the same courage she showed me that day in Afghanistan. Sarah, you are my hero, my best friend, and now my partner for life." As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Sarah whispered in Jake's ear, "I love you, Commander Mitchell." "I love you too, Mrs. Mitchell," Jake replied, holding her close. They danced under the stars at their outdoor reception, surrounded by the people who loved them most. The journey from a battlefield in Afghanistan to this perfect moment had been long and sometimes difficult, but it had led them exactly where they belonged, in each other's arms. Later that night, as they sat on the beach behind their reception venue, still in their wedding clothes, Sarah and Jake watched the waves crash on the shore. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't found each other again?" Sarah asked. "No," Jake said, pulling her closer. "Because I would have never stopped looking for you. Some people are worth waiting a lifetime for." Sarah smiled and leaned against his shoulder. "Good thing we only had to wait 3 years. The best 3 years and the best day of my life," Jake said, kissing the top of her head. As they sat together watching the stars reflect on the ocean, both Sarah and Jake knew that their greatest adventure was just beginning. They had found their way back to each other against all odds, and now they had forever to create new memories together. The SEAL commander and the doctor who saved him under fire had finally found their happy ending, and it was more beautiful than either of them had ever imagined.